Good evening and welcome to the Stearns County Board of Adjustments public hearing for September 27th, 2021. A few announcements to begin with. If you are in possession of a cell phone or some other type of paging device, we ask that you put it on the silent mode at this time. Please note that all testimony is being tape recorded for the record. If you're going to speak, you will be asked to state your name and your address for the record first, and then go ahead with your input after you have been recognized by the chair. Members of the Board of Adjustment are appointed by the County Board of Commissioners with one member from each of the 5 commissioner districts, one member at large, and one member appointed by the Planning Commission. I'll give a brief overview of how the meeting works this evening. I will read a variance request, and that opens the public hearing for that request. While I'm reading your request, I would ask that the applicants or the representatives come forward and have a seat in front of the board by the microphones. The applicant and or the representative will be asked to state their name and their address for the record. And then Environmental Services staff will provide a brief overview of the requested variance, the staff report, and any correspondence that has been received regarding the request. The applicant or the representative will then provide any input, comments that they might have. Once the applicant and or the representative have provided their testimony, the board will discuss the request and then ask questions of staff or the applicant. Upon completing the board questions, then I'll ask if there's anybody in the audience who wishes to speak to that request. If there is, I'd ask that person to come forward to the podium, state their name and their address for the record, and give their testimony. When all the testimony is complete, we'll ask the board members for a motion to close the public hearing. Once the motion has passed to close the public hearing, there will be no more input from the audience, from the applicant, or Environmental Services staff unless they are recognized by the chair or if one of the board members wants some type of clarification on the matter. Our first item on the agenda will be the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us and stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item for tonight's meeting is to consider a request from Ryan and Malaya Burgesson, Richmond, Minnesota, from Section 6.2.1A of Stearns County Land Use and Zoning Ordinance 439 to construct a residential accessory structure addition with a larger maximum accessory building area and a larger sidewall and building height than allowed for a property with a lot area of 0 to 0.49 acres. The said ordinance allows for a maximum accessory building area of 900 square feet with a 10-foot sidewall height and a 16-foot building height for a property within a lot area of 0 to 0.49 acres. The affected property is 0.45 acres of Government Lot 1, Section 33, Track 123 North, Range 31 West of Munson Township, and the property address is 20843 Edgewater Road, Richmond, Minnesota. And if you could state your name and addresses for the record, please.
Sure. Malia Bergeson, 20843 Edgewater Road, Richmond, Minnesota.
Ryan Bergeson. Ryan Bergeson, 20843 Edgewater Road, Richmond, Minnesota.
And we'll be back to you in just a few minutes for your comments. If we could now have, first we'll do a roll call as to which members were able to visit the site. Dennis?
Yes.
Jill? And Jill is not with us this evening at this time because of a work requirement. Mike?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jake?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
And I also visited the site. If we now could have the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. The applicants are asking to construct a 24-foot by 24-foot 576 square foot residential accessory structure addition. The addition will have 13-foot sidewall height and a 17-foot building height that will result in a maximum accessory building area of 1,296 square feet on a property with a lot area of 0.45 acres. The applicants currently own a meets and bounds tract in Munson Township. The property is in an R1 zoning district. They purchased the property in 2020. There is an existing 720 square foot residential accessory structure on the property that was permitted and constructed in 1987. According to the Stearns County Assessor's records, a 288 square foot roof overhang addition was added to the structure in 2015. The addition was added by a previous owner without a permit. There is also a 120 square foot shed that meets the requirements for a water-oriented accessory structure that does not require a permit and does not count towards the maximum accessory building area. The property is in the Shoreland Overlay District of Big Lake, classified recreational development. Big Lake is on the list of impaired waters for mercury and fish. The subsurface sewage treatment system on the property was permitted and installed in 1994. The system was certified compliant in 2020. The current impervious lot coverage for the property is 11.4%. The proposed impervious lot coverage when the project is complete will be 12.9%. An alternative to this request is to construct a 180 square foot addition with 10-foot sidewall height and 16-foot building height that meets the requirements of the ordinance. Munson Township, Sauk River Watershed District, Big Lake Aquatic Association, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and property owners within 500 feet have been notified of this request. And we did get one correspondence from the Sauk River Watershed District, John Rochline, and he just mentioned that if granted, a permit may be required from Sauk River Watershed District as well. So above and beyond the county permit, there would be a Sauk River Watershed District permit, and you'll just have to get in contact with them if that's the case. The only other thing that I have is if this request were to be denied, I would ask that you guys would do a separate findings of fact to keep the existing overhang if that would be the case, because that was not permitted at the time it was added. And that is all I have.
Okay, thank you. And now if we have comments from the applicant.
Okay, so this started because we really needed storage. We bought the property from my parents who had it for about 4 years, and they are not the owners that built the lean-to without the permit. Let that be noted. But we currently have an 8x8 storage room, mechanical room in our home, and that is it for storage. So we currently cannot park in our garage because our kids have things. So we really just need the storage is basically. And we didn't realize that the lean-to building was not permitted until this process. So, Ryan, do you have anything?
Okay, thank you. And we could ask questions if we have
Sure.
additional questions of you as we go on. Board members having questions of the applicant or of staff?
Madam Chair, I have a question for the applicants. Is there a reason for the 13-foot sidewalls? Is it just to match the existing lean-to, or is that specifically for
just to match the existing lean-to?
All right.
But that could be lowered.
Okay.
If that helps.
Okay.
Okay,
Madam
go
Chair,
ahead, Dennis.
Gregory, a question for the applicants. Did you consider, rather than a building addition, just closing in the lean-to that's already existing on the shed?
Yes, we've considered that as well, but the additional space would be really helpful because we have boats, snowmobiles, stuff like that. We don't want that to be seen as an eyesore. We'd rather have that contained, closed in, instead of having clutter all over the yard.
Okay, other questions? All right, is there anyone in the audience at this time that would like to speak to this application? Anyone at all? Okay. Are there board members with any additional questions before we go to findings?
Madam Chair, Dave Gamrod. Is this lot been surveyed?
Yes.
It has. You're 1/100th from having 0.5 acres, which would put you in a different bracket. Okay, I guess that's the question. Sometimes it.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Jason Crone, question for the applicant. So right now you have the design in place for this to be built. You mentioned that lowering the sidewalls would be, an option. How does that impact your design?
I don't know that it would really change anything. They just have to lower that existing roof line.
Okay. So the additional cost of doing that part of the work.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just a point to Member Gamrat's statement. The lot size is 0.45 acres, so it is it's 0.04 acres different than the 0.49.
I thought
So
it
just
was 0.49, so
Right.
I missed that.
Yeah, and so it's a little less than 20,000 square feet, 19. I had it 487 square feet, and so just as we're contemplating what our decision should be.
Okay, any other discussion before we go to findings?
Madam Chair, comment. I did drive down the road and I saw quite a few accessory buildings that were much larger than this. And they're probably before official controls or what, but they're quite a bit larger. I went a ways past it.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Jason Crone, I would second that. That entire road has, it's pretty clustered. There's a lot of things that were done prior to a lot of those official controls being put in place. So this, my observation as well, this certainly isn't out of character for the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're ready to close the public hearing and go to findings.
So move, Mike Kane.
All right, we have a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second, Dennis Gregory.
Is there anyone opposed to closing the public hearing? Hearing none, the public hearing is now closed and we'll move on to the findings. All right, the variance request is to construct a 24 by 24 residential accessory structure addition with 13-foot sidewall height and 17-foot building height that will result in a maximum accessory building area of 1,296 square feet on a property with a lot area of 0.45 acres. Number one, the proposed use is allowed in the zoning district in which the subject property is located, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Mike Kane. It's a R1 zone and accessory structures are allowed in that zoning.
All right, we have a yes for number one. Any additional comments for number one? Anyone opposed to yes for number one? Seeing none, we'll mark that as unanimous yes. Number two, the variance will be in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the official controls and any related ordinances, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, the ordinance, the intention of this ordinance is to prevent properties from overbuilding shed structures and things like that, which can create land use conflicts with neighbors and others in the area. In this particular instance, I think based on the development and the way that seems to be the norm on that road, it's more consistent and you'll avoid some of those issues in this instance.
All right, we have a yes for number two. Is there any additional comments for number two?
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I don't disagree with Member Crone's statements. And I realize that each one of these requests are unique, and so there is no such thing as precedence because each one is unique. But at the same time, the board in past requests of this nature has looked at the size of the lot, has looked at the size of the building, and wanted to be sure that the size of the building was in harmony with the size of the lot. This lot is under 20,000 square feet. We're talking about a building that is both, or all three, a higher sidewall at 13 feet versus 10, a higher roof height at 17 versus 16, and a larger square footage, even larger, I think, than what would be allowed on up to an acre lot. So, you know, if the applicants were to come back with something that had a sidewall height that matched and a building height that matched and a square footage that was a little bit more of a compromise given their lot size, I would say it is in harmony, but with the current request, I would say it's not in harmony.
All right. And so we have one yes and one no. And is there any additional discussion for number 2? And since we have one yes and one no, we'll do roll call on the remainder of the members. Mike?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jake?
Yes.
And I'm going to be a no because I would also like to see maybe a little bit revision on smaller size of a building. But we have 3 yeses, 2 nos, so the yes for number 2. Number 3, the variance will be consistent with a comprehensive plan, yes or no.
Madam Chair, Jason Crone. I believe under Lakeshore Living Policies, under number 8, evaluate Lakeshore housing projects using the following as guidelines in addition to the comprehensive plan's future land use factors. The project preserves sightlines and does not negatively impact the view sheds of adjacent properties. It's tucked back and really doesn't impact that in this case. And it also maintains the neighborhood's residential character. And in this case, again, if it's in a different neighborhood, it would be a different circumstance. But in this particular street, I think it's consistent and fits that.
All right, we have a yes for number 3. Is there any additional discussion?
Madam Chair, Mike Kane, I'm pretty much in agreement with that as well. If this were on the lake, I think my decision would be different, but because it's across the street and a field on the other side, and most of the neighbors have similar styles. Also, to remind the board, we can ask them to lower the sidewall height. They are willing to do that. It would be an additional cost to them, but we can ask them to do that as a part of this plan.
Okay, so we have 2 yeses at this point for number 3. Any additional comments?
Well, Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. Is Member Haynes suggesting that if we approve this variance that we have a condition that they lower the sidewall height and the building height, because that might change my thought process on this as well.
All right. Maybe we'll go back, before we proceed, to go back to the applicant. And when we're talking about a lowered sidewall height, right now you're requesting a 13-foot. If you did lower the sidewall height, what would you feel? Would it match the building that's currently there then, or?
No, it would still be a little bit higher than the current garage. Probably a foot higher instead of the 3 feet higher.
Would it be possible to just continue with whatever sidewall height the current garage is, so it's one continuous instead of the layered? I mean, is that, I don't know how it's laid out. But
Is the current sidewall height then 10 or 12 feet?
the current on the
On the
lean-to portion,
Yes.
that's roughly 12 to 13,
Okay, but on the rest of the building, what was the sidewall height on the
9.
9? Okay. Mm-hmm.
So my comment was a foot higher on the extra building would make it 10-foot sidewall then?
Yes.
And if you have 10-foot sidewall, what would be the building height?
Yeah.
It would be 16 or less.
I would assume.
I would assume. From what's allowed.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right.
Okay. And the square footage of the building, to me, isn't as great of a concern because we are at, well, he's at 0.45 acres. So he's within 0.05 of the next category. The next category is 1,200 square feet. And that might just necessarily be sometimes the size of lumber or the distance between poles on a barn, can make that difference, make it more standard to what standard building is. What are other board members' thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, does that change the functionality of your building based on what you're going to store in it from a height perspective? And the reason I asked, I think it's a great solution. It does help with this process a lot if we would make that a condition for some of the board members. But if it changes the way you're going to use the building dramatically, that now you're going to be storing a pontoon or a camper outside versus inside, well, then that defeats part of the purpose of the variance as well. So that's, I guess, my question for the applicants in this case.
I don't believe that it's going to make that big of a difference.
Okay.
If we can stick with the 10-foot sidewall,
okay,
I think it'll be fine.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so then let's continue with number 3. We have, let's see, yes, number 3. We have 2 yeses at the current time for number 3. Any additional discussion? Anyone opposed to yes for number 3? All right, we'll mark that as unanimous yes. Question number 4, the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Mike Hain, I believe it's reasonable to want to have a storage facility when you're on a lake to store your things that you don't want outside.
All right, we have a yes for number 4. Any additional discussion? Anyone opposed to yes? Seeing none, we'll mark that as unanimous yes. Number 5, the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner.
Madam Chair, I would say it's probably unique to the property because there are other properties adjacent to them that have much larger structures than this. So I think it's gives it a uniqueness. It's not going to hinder anybody's sight lines. It's across the street from the lake. I think that makes it unique.
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, just to follow on to Member Gamrat's statement, I think the uniqueness has to be to the specific property, not the adjoining properties. And I think the circumstances here that's unique to the property is just the size of the property at 0.45 acres. And so would add that to Member Gamrat's comments.
All right.
Madam Chair, I'll also kick in just the uniqueness. They inherited it from their parents or bought it from their parents. The sidewalls were already existing at the 13 feet. So that is a uniqueness for this specific request. But like they had mentioned, they would be willing to go down to 10 on this. So.
All right, so if my record keeping here is correct, I would say that we have 3 yeses, Dennis, Mike, and Dave. And is there any additional comments? What about additional other members? Are you in favor of yes for number 4?
I'm good with yes.
And as well, myself as well. So number 4 is unanimous, yes. Number 5, excuse me, that was number 5. Number 6, the variance, if granted, maintains the essential character of the locality, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, we've talked a little bit about this in the previous findings of fact, and I think it does stay consistent with the character of the area.
All right, any additional discussion? Anyone opposed to yes for number 6? All right, we'll mark that as unanimous yes. Number 7, the need for the variance involves more than economic considerations, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Jake Hawk, is the applicants were willing to prove they are willing to put more money into this project. So really, this is more of a spatial issue and not an economics issue.
All right, we have a yes for number 7. Anyone disagree with yes for 7? All right, we'll mark that as unanimous yes, and we are now ready for a motion.
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I would make a motion that's slightly modified from the applicant's request to approve a variance for the applicants to construct a 24-foot by 24-foot residential accessory structure addition with a no more than 10-foot sidewall height and no more than 16-foot building height that results in a maximum accessory building area of no more than 1,296 square feet.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, Mike Kane, I will second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and I will do roll call on the remaining members. Dave?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Jake?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. So motion carries. And if you have questions about your application, you can check with county staff during regular business hours. And thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
I did those out of order and caught you off guard, didn't I? Our next item on the agenda is to consider a request from Casey and Nicole Rude of Belgrade, Minnesota, from Section 6.9.5D of Stearns County Land Use and Zoning Ordinance 439 to activate a less than 100 animal unit feet lot that is less than 100 feet from a residential dwelling and less than 500 feet from the property line. The said ordinance requires a setback of 500 feet to a residential dwelling from an animal feedlot that is registered for less than 100 animal units and 50 feet from the property line. The affected property is 10 acres of the south, 790 feet of the east, 551.4 feet of the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 36, Track 123 North, Range 34 West of Crow River Township, and the property address is 20079 378th Avenue, Belgrade, Minnesota. And I believe our applicants with us via phone.
Yeah.
All right. Are the applicants there, please?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, thank you. And if you could just state your name and your address, and then we'll be back to you in a few minutes after that.
Casey Rude, 20079 378th Avenue, Belgrade, Minnesota.
All right, thank you, and we'll be back to you in a few minutes. If we now could do a roll call as to who was able to visit the property. Dennis?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jake?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
And I also visited the property. If we now could have the staff report, please.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this request, as you described, is after the fact for a reduction of the setback to the property line, which would be the request of 1 foot, and then the request of 458 feet from the residential dwelling. That's a 8.4% deviation from the requirement, and the property line setback is a 98% deviation from the requirement. In your packet, the applicant is proposing a handful of different feedlot structures and open lots. Those dimensions are listed in your packet. They're also included in the map on your packet for the site. The applicant is requesting 95.10 animal units, which would be consisting basically of beef bulls and then a combined head count of 20 of poultry. The surrounding parcels are located in Stearns County, are zoned A40. The adjacent land actually to the south is in Candy-Ojai County. The state of Minnesota owns the surrounding parcels other than the parcel that's listed in your packet, which is to the northeast of Casey's parcel. We did a compliance inspection for the site in August 6th of 2021, and the site was deemed non-compliant with Stearns County Ordinance 439 because there was not a permit for either the expanded open lot areas or the increase in animal units and setbacks that weren't met. And so the feedlot, though, is compliant for water quality discharge standards. This request, currently there is no impacts to the wetlands that aren't already existing, and those that are existing, there is a surrounding type 1 and type 2 wetland on the state property, but we do not in our ordinance require any setbacks to those type of wetlands. So all in all, there is no concerns regarding wetlands with this request. Per the current memorandum of understanding with Crow River Township, the applicant will need a variance from Crow River Township for the township road setback that applies to the proposed open lots number 1 and number 2 shown on the included feedlot footprint map in your packet. Just to note that if the Stearns County Board of Adjustment grants the variance as requested based on the findings of fact this evening and the township does not grant the applicant a variance for a reduced setback from the township road, the applicant will have to close and revegetate any existing areas used as feedlot to meet that road setback. Crow River Township, the Observer, Cold Spring Record, North Fork Crow River Watershed District, and property owners within 500 feet have been notified of this request. The other attachment in your packet is just the map that shows the 1 mile project map, which lists just this current request as the only feedlot within that 1 mile. And then we do have a buildable map included showing the setbacks of the 50-foot setback from the property line and then the 500-foot setback from the neighboring home as part of your packet, which is on your screen currently. So that's all I have for overview for the staff report, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. And then we will go to the applicant for any comments that they might have.
The fence was primarily put up because there is also public hunting that is surrounding here, and people were walking through our woods, basically on our yard, even though they're not supposed to, they do. So that's kind of why the fence is where it's at, to keep them as far away as possible from coming into our yard.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the board for the applicant or staff?
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, just a question for the applicant. When was the fence put up near the property line?
I believe it was 2016 or 2017.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions?
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, just kind of piggyback off of Dennis's question. So prior to that fence, was the only indication for the, I guess, letting hunters know they're leaving the public hunting area were just the signs? There was no other fencing or anything else there?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Dave Gamrad, I have a question for the applicant. Did the DNR dike any of these wetlands that increase their size?
Say that again?
Did the DNR, when they bought the property, a lot of times when they buy property, they put dikes up and stuff to enhance wetlands. Did they do that?
Oh, no,
Okay.
they did not.
All right.
All right, it appears we do not have any additional questions. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, are we ready to close the public hearing and go to findings? Go ahead.
For the applicant, was this site totally void of animals for a period of time?
There's kind of always been animals here, I guess, from when my grandparents had it. I do have animals here basically 6 months out of the year.
Okay,
And then they're gone.
there wasn't a prolonged time where there were no animals at the property.
No, there's always been animals here.
Okay. Question for staff. Did this at one time have a grandfathered permit for having animals?
Madam Chair, members of the board, in regards to that question, so we have no actual feedlot registration history for this property. So we did look at the 1999-2000 aerial photos, and there is a couple of those items that would be considered structures as far as grandfathered in, and those were noted in your packet. But we don't have no history as far as a registration documentation from 99-2000 for this property.
Is that because, you know, of its location, it was kind of overlooked in the registration period?
At that time, I believe, if Becky wants to speak on this.
Madam Chair, if I may, Becky Schlorf, Ag and Water Resources Division Supervisor. If it's under 10 animal units, it's not required and was not required to register. So that may have been the case.
Okay.
So they may still had feedlot buildings and structures, but not been at 10 animal units and required to register.
Okay, thank you.
And then, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'd just like to note that I haven't received any formal correspondence regarding this application. So.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions?
I'd make a motion we close the public hearing.
All right, we have a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second?
Jason Crone will second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Anyone opposed to closing the public hearing? Seeing none, the public hearing is now closed, and we will move on to findings. And this will be an after-the-fact finding. To activate and permit after the fact a less than 100 animal unit feedlot that is 458 feet from a residential dwelling and 1 foot from the property line. Number one, is the proposed use allowed in the zoning district in which the subject property is located, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Mike Kane, A40 zone does allow feedlots.
All right, we have a yes for number one. Any additional comments? Anyone opposed to yes? Mark that as unanimous yes. Number two, is the variance in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the official controls?
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I think it is in harmony for two reasons. First, the amount of deviation to the residence is very small, and it is to an open feedlot. And more importantly, I think the 50-foot property line setback, which is a great ordinance to have, I think there's some unique circumstances in this case with the Minnesota property next door, DNR property next door, and the hunting issues that the property owner has had. So I think overall it's in harmony.
All right, we have a yes for number two. Any additional comments? Anyone opposed to yes for two? Seeing none, we'll mark that as unanimous yes. Number 3, is the variance request consistent with the comprehensive plan?
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I would point to agricultural goals 1 and 2, supporting agriculture as a desirable land use for the long term, and which is clearly what we're doing in this case. And also, as reported by staff, the farm is not in any way impacting the water quality, so they're utilizing sustainable practices for that.
Okay, we have a yes for number 3. Any additional discussion? Anyone opposed to yes for number 3? We'll mark that as unanimous yes. Number 4, is the property owner proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by official controls?
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, I think it's reasonable to have a feedlot in an agricultural zoning district and in the manner in which they're doing it in this location. To Chair Board Member Gregory's point, it's unique for where it's at. If this was in a different area, it may not be reasonable to run a feedlot right up to the property lines, but in this instance, it does seem reasonable.
Okay, we have a yes for number 4. Any additional comments? Anyone opposed to yes? Seeing none, we'll mark it as unanimous. Number 5, is the plight of the landowner due to circumstances unique to the property not created by the landowner?
Madam Chair, just as Commissioner Crone said, the property is unique. 3 sides of this property is surrounded by Minnesota DNR hunting land, and I think the reason to put up the fence, to offset your boundary is unique to this property.
Okay, we have a yes for number 5. Is there any additional discussion? Anyone opposed to yes? Mark that as unanimous yes. Number 6, will the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Bonnie Mossman, I would say yes, because this historically has had animals on it all the way back to his grandparents, and so it's really not going to change the character of this locality. We have 1 yes for number 6. Is there anyone with additional comments? Anyone opposed to yes? Mark that as unanimous. Number 7, the need for the variance involves more than economic considerations, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Dave Gamrad, I don't believe economics were part of this discussion.
All right, we have a yes for number 7. Any additional comments? Anyone opposed to yes? Seeing none, I'll mark that as unanimous yes, and we are ready for a motion.
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I would make a motion that we approve the applicant's request to permit a less than 100 animal unit feedlot that is 458 feet from a residential dwelling and 1 foot from the property line.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Jason Crone will second that.
And we have a second, and I will do roll call on the remaining members. Mike?
Yes.
Jake?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
And myself, I vote yes as well. So it's unanimous yes. And if you have if the applicant has additional questions, they can contact staff during regular business hours. And thank you for being with us via phone this evening.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is to consider a request from Michael and Samantha Backer of Albany, Minnesota, from Section 6.2.1P, Table M, of the Stearns County Subsurface Sewage Treatment System Ordinance 422 to place a subsurface soil treatment area less than 20 feet from a residential dwelling. The said ordinance requires a subsurface soil treatment area to be placed 20 feet from a residential dwelling. The affected property is lots 14 and 15 of Block 2, Town Site of St. Anthony, Sections 32, Track 126 North, Range 31 West, the City of St. Anthony, and the property address is 24222 Trobeck Street, Albany, Minnesota. And could you state your name and address for the record, please?
Michael Backer. Address is 24222 Trobeck Street in Albany, Minnesota.
Samantha Backer. Address is 24222 Trobeck Street in Albany.
All right, thank you, and we'll be back to you in just a couple minutes. We'll do roll call on who was able to visit the property. Dennis?
Yes.
Jill? Oh, excuse me. Jill's not here this evening. Mike?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jake?
Yes.
Jason?
No, it was not.
And I also was able to visit the site. All right, if we could go then to the staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I do believe their contractor is on the phone as well, so we may want to offer that person a chance to speak coming up as well. The applicants currently would like to place a subsurface soil treatment area 11 feet from the residential dwelling. The ordinance requires that the soil treatment area be located 20 feet from the residential dwelling. They currently own lots 14 and 15, Block 2 of the town site of St. Anthony. The tract contains approximately 21,780 square feet. The applicant purchased the property in June of 2021. There is an existing 5-bedroom residential dwelling on the property that was constructed in 1980 per the Stearns County Assessor's records. The dwelling was constructed prior to the adoption of the official controls. There's no permit on record for the existing septic system that services the dwelling. A compliance inspection was completed on the existing system by a licensed septic inspector for the previous property owners prior to the property transfer in May of 2021. The existing septic system was found to be non-compliant for tank integrity and other compliance conditions. A septic design has been completed for a replacement septic system by a licensed septic designer. The size of the lot, the existing structures, and the well location limit the area available to locate the mound soil treatment area. The property is not in the shoreland or floodplain overlay district. There's no permit on record for the existing system. A compliance inspection was conducted on that system and it was found to be non-compliant. The City of St. Anthony and property owners within 500 feet have been notified of this request, and I do not have any other correspondence with regards to this request.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll go to the applicant. Anything that comments you'd like to share with us?
Essentially we purchased the home over the summer, and what I'm under the understanding of is that due to the transfer of the property, septic system is non-compliant anymore. To my understanding, there is not really anywhere else to locate the septic system to not need a variance from the dwelling in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, thank you. And we have the septic designer on the phone, and if they would, we do not. All right. So we've heard from the applicant that he feels there's really no place else on the property that will work. Okay, so we'll go to questions from board members.
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, and this is a question for staff probably. Within that development, there's area between the cemetery and the applicants. Who owns that piece of property?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I believe that would be actually dedicated roadway. Shelley, can you go back to the previous?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying. That makes sense.
Yeah. So there are not roads constructed. So you're asking about, I'll point to this so you can see this area. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I was. And
Yep. So that would be dedicated roadway. That doesn't mean that there's roads there. It's just dedicated to the public.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, it appears that we do have the septic
Tim, are you
designer
there?
on the phone, so we will hear his comments.
Tim? Can you hear me?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay. You're on speaker, Tim, with the board right now.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you very much for allowing me to do this from the seat of a backhoe. If I've got everything, all my ducks in a row, the subject property is just extremely limited on space, and due to structural setbacks, water diversions, etc., we were proposing to use some retaining walls and some reduced setbacks in order to fit a conforming replacement sewage treatment system on the site. Does anybody have any questions or concerns? Otherwise, I think we're kind of shoehorning this in the best we can.
Any questions for the designer from board members? All right, it doesn't seem that they have any questions, so thank you for being with us, and work safe on your backhaul.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Jamie.
Bye.
All right, if we have any other questions. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak to this application? By law, we have to ask.
Madam Chair, Jason Crow and I make a motion. We close the public hearing.
All right, is there a second?
Mike Kane, I'll second.
Is there anyone opposed to closing the public hearing? Seeing none, the public hearing is now closed, and we will move to findings. The variance request is to place a subsurface sewage treatment area 11 feet from a residential dwelling. Number one, the proposed use is allowed in the zoning district in which the subject property is located, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Mike Kane, septic systems are allowed in the R1 zone, actually required.
All right, we have a yes in number one. Any additional comments? Anyone opposed to yes? Mark that as unanimous, yes. Number two, the variance will be in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the official controls and any related ordinances, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I think it is in harmony. It is they're replacing a non-compliant system with a compliant system, and per the installer are putting the system as far from the residential dwelling as they can.
All right, we have a yes for number two. Any additional comments? Anyone opposed? We'll mark that as unanimous, yes. Number three, the variance will be consistent with the comprehensive plan, yes or no?
Madam Chair, I think under nature goals to preserve and restore, protect important natural systems and natural resources, I think by having the right kind of septic system will preserve the water in the area.
All right, we have a yes from Mike. Is there any other discussion? Anyone opposed to yes? We'll mark that as unanimous. Number four, the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I believe that the property owners do plan to use it in a reasonable manner. Again, as indicated by the designer, this is the best place for the system.
All right, thank you. We have a yes for number 4. Any other discussion? Anyone opposed to yes? Seeing none, we'll mark that as unanimous. Number 5, the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner.
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, I believe this is definitely unique to the property. Very tight parameters to fit a septic system in with the way the property is set up that the applicants purchased.
All right, we have a yes for number 5. Any additional comments? Anyone opposed to yes? Mark that as unanimous yes. Number 6, the variance, if granted, maintains the essential character of the locality.
Madam Chair, Dave Cameron, this won't change anything. Other properties have septic systems, and this is just another one.
All right, we have a yes for number 6. Any additional discussion? Anyone opposed to yes? Seeing none, we'll mark it as unanimous yes. And question number 7, the need for the variance involves more than economic considerations.
Madam Chair, Jason Crone, this is, economics were not discussed, and this is about having a functioning septic system in compliance.
All right, we have a yes for number 7. Any additional discussion? Anyone opposed to yes? Hearing none, we'll mark that as unanimous yes, and we are ready for a motion.
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, I make a motion that we approve the applicant's variance request to place a subsurface soil treatment area 11 feet from a residential dwelling.
All right, do we have a second?
Madam Chair, Dave Gamrat, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll do roll call on the remainder. Mike?
Yes.
Jake?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
And I am also a yes. So unanimous. Yes, and if you have additional questions, you can ask staff during regular business hours. Thank you for being with us this evening. Our last item on the agenda for this evening is to consider a request from Gary and Lynn Olson of Hugo, Minnesota from sections 5.1.2b2, 5.1.2c2, 9.9.9a3, and 10.2.11a2 of the Stearns County Land Use and Zoning Ordinance 439 to construct a second-story addition onto a legal non-conforming dwelling in the floodplain. The existing dwelling does not meet the regulatory flood protection elevation, and the addition will be ahead of the established building line and less than 63 feet from the center line of the private road easement as traveled. The said ordinance requires if an addition to be existing non-conforming dwelling in a floodplain exceeds 50% of the market value, the dwelling must comply with the floodplain requirements. The addition must be landward of the established building line and 63 feet from the center line of the private road easement as traveled. The affected property is 1.03 acres of Lot 1, Cedar Knoll, Plot 2, and part of the Government Lot 3, Section 31, Track 126 North, Range 30 West of Holding Township. The property address is 38737 Tamarack Lane, Avon, Minnesota. And if the applicants could introduce themselves and state their address, please.
Lynn Olson, 38737 Tamarack Lane. We are not living in Hugo anymore. We have sold our house there. So this is our residence.
All right, thank you for that clarification.
Gary Olson, 38737 Tamarack Lane, Avon, Minnesota.
All right, thank you, and we'll be back to you in just a few minutes. I will do roll call on who was able to visit the site. Dennis?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jake? Yes. Jason?
Yes.
And I also visited the site. All right, if we could have the staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. The applicants are asking to construct a 720 square foot second story addition on a legal non-conforming residential dwelling that is in the floodplain. The existing dwelling does not meet the regulatory flood protection elevation. The addition will be 79 feet from the ordinary high water level of a lake classified recreational development ahead of the established building line and 57 feet from the center line of a private road easement as traveled. The applicants currently own Lot 1 of Cedar Knoll Plat 2 and part of Government Lot 3. Cedar Knoll Plat 2 was platted in 1966. The tract contains a total lot area of 44,862 square feet, with 14,137 square feet of that being between the lake and the road. The current impervious lot coverage for the portion of the property between the lake and the road is 23.8%, according to the survey provided by the applicant. The property is in an R1 zoning district. The applicants purchased the property in 2020. There is an existing 2,104 square foot residential dwelling with attached garage and a 220 square foot deck that were permitted and constructed in 1985. The existing dwelling has a crawl space at 1134.25 that is not meeting the regulatory flood protection elevation of 1138.25. According to the Stearns County Assessor's records, a 360 square foot framed screen porch was constructed in 2008, and there are no permits on file for the porch addition. The property is in the shoreland and floodplain overlay district of Two Rivers Lake, which is classified recreational development. Two Rivers is on the list of impaired waters for nutrients and mercury in fish. The subsurface sewage treatment system was installed in 1985 and 2020. A compliance inspection completed on the system in 2020. The system was certified compliant. The current impervious lot coverage, as mentioned earlier, is 23.8%. The proposed impervious lot coverage when the project is complete will remain at 23.8%. Holding Township, Friends of Two Rivers Lake, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and property owners within 500 feet have been notified of this request. Let me see, and there's one other thing that I have to mention. So we have to, if the variances are granted, we must determine if mitigation, as stated in Minnesota State Statute 394.35, is required. Examples of mitigation include stormwater runoff management, reducing impervious, so on and so forth. And there is a flood insurance notice that I have to read here. Notice regarding issuance of a variance to construct below base flood level shall be given in accordance with section 10.1.17 of this ordinance. No variance shall have the effect of allowing in any district uses prohibited in the district. Permit a lower degree of flood protection than the regulatory flood protection elevation for the particular area, or permit standards lower than those required by state law. The following additional variance criteria of the Federal Emergency Management Agency must be satisfied. Variances shall not be issued by a community within any designated regulatory floodway in any increase in flood levels during the base flood discharge. Variances shall only be issued by a community upon A, showing of good and sufficient cause, a determination that failure to grant the variance would result in exceptional hardship to the applicant, and a determination that the granting of the variance will not result in increased flood heights, additional threats to public safety, extraordinary public expense, create nuisances, cause fraud on or victimization of the public, or conflict with existing local laws or ordinances. Variances shall only be issued upon a determination that the variance is the minimum necessary considering the flood hazard to afford relief. And then we did receive one response. I apologize that I didn't get it to anybody, but it came today at 4:21 by email to the land use supervisor, Angie Berg. It says, Dear Miss Berg, it's from the Department of Natural Resources, Seal Strauss, State Coordinator for the National Flood Insurance Program. It says, comments on variance request for parcel 1307856.0005, Gary and Lynn Olson, Two Rivers Lake, Stearns County. We are in receipt of the variance request for the parcel on Two Rivers Lake. An addition and improvements to an existing non-conforming building are proposed that would be a substantial improvement. The county floodplain ordinance requires that the existing building and addition improvements be brought into compliance with minimum elevation requirements. This requirement in the county's ordinance is consistent with the state and federal laws. The proposed improvements do not show the lowest floor of the improved building meeting minimum elevation required by the county's ordinance. We recommend denial of this variance. State law, see Minnesota Rule 6120.6100. And the county's ordinance specifies that a variance cannot be given to allow the structure's lowest floor to be below the regulatory flood protection elevation. If FEMA finds a community has a pattern of granting unacceptable variances, they can potentially suspend the community from the National Flood Insurance Program. If the community is suspended from the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance would not be available in that community, and flood insurance is required for homes and businesses in mapped floodplains with a federally backed loan. Most types of post-disaster assistance would also not be available if there is a federal disaster declaration. Disasters include not just flooding, but all disaster types, including tornadoes, ice storms, etc. In addition, by granting this variance, the county would essentially be giving permission for this structure to be flooded, which could lead to liability concerns in the future. Should you have questions on this matter, please contact me at 651-259-5713 or seal.strauss@state.mn.us. Sincerely, Seal Strauss, State Coordinator, National Flood Insurance Program, DNR Ecological and Water Resources. And that's the only other correspondence that I have.
I have a
Madam Chair, members of the board, I apologize. It came at 4:21. Our business hours ended at 4:30, and I just had no way of getting it to everybody before that.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure that the applicant, to find out if they had seen it ahead of time.
Yeah.
And we have some options if we can act on this evening, or we could table it if you wanted to have the opportunity to, study that or look into that, their comments. I wouldn't want you feeling pressured into having us act on it tonight if you haven't had an opportunity to, check into the comments that were made.
I assume this committee can't overrule this. Or is that true?
I can't say what we would vote on, but I would guess that it's probably pretty unlikely that we would vote contrary to their recommendation. Until we would pull a vote, I can't say that.
Right.
But
okay. Obviously, our house was built before the floodplain elevations were even established, right? I've checked with all my neighbors. They've never had flooding. I can see by my crawl space that it's bone dry, it's insulated, it's clean. It's unreasonable to get it up to code. I can't fill in my crawl space, right? So this was our dream to try to add some square footage to make it our permanent residence. And, I've made a bunch of compromises Jamie came out and based on learning what the codes were, we've made a lot of sacrifices. We were initially going to we were initially going to expand the crawl space to go underneath the porch. Well, then when I learned of that, we decided to use footings instead, so we could leave the crawl space as is. I learned about the 63 feet. We wanted to go over the entire garage, so then we pushed it back to the next wall that was a load-bearing wall, but it's still 57 or 58. You know, there's lots of things we've changed to try to comply. You know, we didn't build we obviously built, or we bought it a year ago, and the screen porch is put on slightly over the building line. So we wanted to go even further toward the lake, but we decided to keep the same exact footprint. And now, you know, now I hear this. Yeah, I assume I have all kinds of neighbors that have elevations that are very similar to mine. Yeah, the original owner, and I don't have the details on this, but the original owner apparently had a one-time shot before he built at bringing in fill and building it up, and Roland Little was his name, and he took advantage of that. The rest of the neighbors, I don't believe, did, which brought us up a bit. But I guess that doesn't really change the floodplain elevation, but it lessens the chance of there ever being flooding.
I have a question for staff. When I was out of the property and looked around, is there ever any option or exemption to this requirement if they were to build like a berm somewhere on the property that would be above that elevation? I don't know. That's just kind of a wild
Madam
idea.
Chair,
I didn't
members
know.
of the board, that floodplain elevation, there's no ways around it. I mean, other than applying for the variance. And the existing structure is allowed to stay the way it is. It's just because that they are increasing, they're going to be increasing the value of that structure by more than 50%. That requires it to be brought up into compliance with FEMA floodplain regulations.
And that 50%, is that determined by like the bids they got from contractors, or how is that determined?
It would be 50% of the existing value of the structure. And my guess is adding that second story is going to increase. I mean, we didn't run the information. I mean, that could be another option if you want us to run that. It would involve him having to put together a, you know, get an estimate as to how much it's going to cost for that addition to be put on. And then we can look at the assessor's, you know, value to see if it's going to meet that 50%. Something to keep in mind is, say he gets, and say it's only 40%, okay? If he would proceed with that and it's only 40%, then they would not have to bring it up, but they would almost never be able to do any sort of maintenance on it, because once it reaches that 50%, it has to be brought up. And we go from the value of this day. So the value doesn't change once they add the addition on. We go with the value of the structure at this point in time. And so, I mean, it's up to you guys on, you know, what you guys want to do, and the applicant to decide how you guys would like to move forward. I mean, you certainly can still go through your findings of fact, and if the findings of fact grant, then they move forward. If they deny, then they're going to have they're going to have an option. They're going to have to change their plans somehow. So.
Okay, comments or questions from the board?
Madam Chair, Mike Kane. Isn't there also a petition you could go in front of the floodplain, and if there hasn't been floods in so many years, they could revise those floodplain elevations?
There could be a letter of map amendment that would have to be done. It would be required to be done by the property owners. It wouldn't be something that we would petition for. Generally, I don't know the success rate on something like that. So, yeah.
Right.
Shelley Benson, Environmental Services Director. This is a lake that historically floods. It has a lot of bounce to it, let's put it that way. And so one of the things that the concern is related to, if we grant a variance, what does that do to the program for flood insurance? And that creates liabilities. So we have to be mindful that in this particular case, or in any case where we're dealing with those floodplains, and if we grant variances, we have to be very mindful how it affects everyone else who has flood insurance. So I just wanted to put that out there. And Two Rivers Lake would be a difficult lake to do a letter of map amendment on, because it's very challenging with its amount of bounce.
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, just for the discussion's sake, what is in the crawl space? And I assume it's utilities. And
it's the well pump comes into there to a compression tank, and then in the joists, that'd be about 4.5 feet above the lowest level. In the joists would be conduit and heat vents.
Sure. And so the cost of moving those utilities to another structure that already exists or that you put up, obviously not without some cost, but what is the potential of doing that?
I have no idea. Yeah.
Because water pumps, water pressure tanks can be moved, furnaces can be moved, the ductwork can stay the same in the joists, because as I understand the level here, the joists would be high enough, I think, to meet the floodplain elevation. So it's just a matter of moving the utilities. And so that's the, maybe
that's
the
certainly something
consideration.
that could be explored. I don't know what the opportunity for that is. And the flooding, the west side gets a lot of flooding. The east side, on the area where I live, they don't get the flooding. And the lake, like she said, the lake goes up and down quite a bit, mostly down this year, when you can't get your pontoon off the lift anymore. But even when I bought it a year ago, it was partially up the rocks, but it was still a long, long way from my lowest level. I literally cannot see any indication of there ever being water in there. There is a sump pump, but I don't think it's ever pumped. But I know it doesn't change this.
A question for staff then, just to clarify that if they were to try to move those utilities that are underneath, and I'm assuming from what Dennis said that there would be enough space to fill in that crawl space up to this level, is that correct, or?
Madam Chair, members of the board, the 1138.25 is the regulatory flood protection elevation. Their lowest floor, the crawl space, is at 1134.25, and their finished floor that they walk on, where their living space is at, is currently at 1138.10. So that's actually just a little bit low of the 1138.25 as well. Obviously not nearly as big of a difference as the low floor. But it would still require a variance in that scenario.
That was my question, that if they filled that in, would they still need a variance?
Right.
They still would. Okay.
But I think, Madam Chair, that whoever is looking at this, if it's 0.15 feet, they would look at the variance much differently than a 4-foot variance.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we can make recommendations or not, but just based on some of this information coming in late, my recommendation would be to do a little more research and see what some options are, and then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already at the point where I would never fill it in. It wouldn't become our permanent residence, and I'd use it for a lake home. I don't want to go down that road. However, the whole idea of figuring out how much it would cost, and if it was 50% or less of the assessed value or
the current assessed value,
what does that change? So let's say it's worth 350 and it comes in at, or I modify the design where I can do something, because I could decide not to go up, but still replace the other point of clarification on here is the 2,100 square feet. The square footage of the living space right now is 1,380. It's 46 by 30. And then if you add 320 feet on for the porch, which is only a 3-season porch, in the wintertime you can't use it, it's not heated, that brings it up to 1,700. If I decided not to go up, I could still replace the porch on footings and run ductwork to it, and at least have a heated the porch would be heated, right? And it could even be an elevated ceiling, and I'm quite certain it would be less than half the property value. Comments on that? Or?
So, Madam Chair, members of the board, the entire request would be the same with if it's less than 50%, then they wouldn't need the variance from the floodplain requirement. So you're still going to have all the other points that are in this request with the exception of the FEMA floodplain elevation.
Okay. Madam Chair, if I may, a question for staff. The current porch is unpermitted, and so even if they keep the same footprint, why was that not part of the variance request to after the fact permit that porch?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the board. I believe if you look at your staff report, did we not put it in there?
And just in a comment.
I might have missed that as an alternative or a recommended condition. So if there are actually two findings of fact that we were going to go through, and one was that if the entire request was denied, that you go through a findings of fact to keep that 320 square foot porch addition that was done without a permit.
Got it. That's what I was missing.
For the applicant, that would take care of any future problems that you have with that 3-season porch not being permitted. It would, in essence, then be permitted.
Right. That porch was initially, the way I understand it, was built as a deck, and then at a later point they put a roof on it, and the roof is almost flat, so I can stand and it's about right here. Another reason we wanted to do this improvement. And then at a later date, they put sidewalls and storm windows on. So I think it was kind of a 3-phase, and I think they felt that they didn't need to permit it.
Well, what are the thoughts of the board on this? My thoughts would be that the original request, that's probably not something that, if he makes decisions to, look into doing something differently, the request that's in front of us is probably not going to be approved. So do we want to go ahead and do findings and make a motion on that, to get it off of our plate? Or I don't see that continuing this request to continue it would benefit the applicant or the county, to continue it to another meeting, unless this request is altered.
And in that case, Madam Chair, and maybe it's a question for staff, do they have to publicize if there's any change at all to the request?
Madam Chair, members of the board, there would be a necessity to republic notice every, however the request is being changed.
Madam Chair, I think if we table it, and then they could make a decision about whether they just want to bring it back for the next meeting, maybe with some adjustments, but maybe not having to change the notice, or that request could go away and they could come to a subsequent meeting with a new request.
To add on, my experience has always been that the best decisions usually are not made when you kind of do it in a rush and try to piecemeal things. And even if it ends up coming back the same, at least all the avenues can be explored and figure out which are the best options for everybody.
So as an applicant, then, would your request be then for us to table it until the next meeting, and that would give you time to explore your options? Or would you request that we act on it? It would be your decision.
Well, I think I know what's going to happen if we act on it.
Okay.
But I don't think I'll be ready by the next meeting.
Well, that's okay. We can table it until
Okay.
you would want to come back and say, I'm ready to proceed.
Since the application has to be tabled, Madam Chair, Shelley Benson, Environmental Services Director, and it has to be renoticed, then the tabling is just a matter of whatever time works. We just have to look at the 60-day rule and go through that process, make sure we're covering all our bases.
Okay. Then I have one additional question. Let's say they go through and research and decide that, they don't want to proceed with this as presented. Should we do findings on the porch and approve that? So let's say they decided not to come back, at least they would have that portion of it approved and they wouldn't have to come back at a later date to approve that.
I don't know. I think it might be better just to wait until you've got all the ducks in a row.
Okay. I just didn't want, if they decided not to come back with this other, then they wouldn't have to come back at all. But
I think, Madam Chair, the circumstances may be different.
Yes,
that
right.
we're looking at, and I appreciate what you're
I was
trying
just
to do for
thinking
the
of
applicants.
trying to, make it more convenient for them, but if not.
Right.
And if they decided to not proceed with that part of the application at the next meeting, we can act on the porch, even if they weren't present. We could go ahead and, act on that just so that they would have that portion of the building taken care of and no future problems with it.
Madam
Okay.
Chair.
So do we have a motion then?
I have a
another
question to
question?
ask staff. If this house would be lifted up a foot or whatever it would take to get past this, would that eliminate all this stuff from the floodplain, the need for a variance from the floodplain?
Madam Chair, members of the board, if they were to lift the structure and fill it to 1138.25 and then set the structure back down, then I would say yes, that would eliminate the need for the variance from the floodplain. It would still require the 57 feet from the road easement. It would still require the variance for being a little bit ahead of the building line, but it would get rid of that FEMA floodplain variance request.
Because I have seen where they've lifted houses and actually changed the floodplain, or in other
the elevation.
Instances. Yeah, the elevation. So it might be give the applicant chance to explore all these options and then before we act on anything.
But we'd have to backfill with 4 feet of fill.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah. It would require backfilling to get you to that 1138.25 elevation.
Or alternative elevation methods, which don't require fill. You just are basically.
What do you got on
just
stilts?
pylons or stilts.
Yeah.
Without even having to research this, I'm not going to go down the road where I'm going to fill in my crawl space with 4 feet. I'd be more inclined to use it as a summer cabin and explore the possibility of doing something with that space if we could get the permitting up to date on the porch, and then the 50%, stay at a 50% less. I've got some options there. Then I get through this floodplain issue, right? If it was less. Yep.
And a question for staff. There's no floodplain issues with permitting the 3-season porch, is there? Oh.
It's less than 50% of the value, so.
So it would not be an issue.
It would
All
not
right.
be.
All right. Are we ready then? Are you ready to make a request whether we would table it or not, or table it to another meeting, or it's your choice whether you would like us to table it or proceed to vote?
No, I think table it.
All right. Do we have a motion to table this until a future date that the applicant can work out with staff?
Madam Chair, Dennis Gregory, so moved.
All right. We have a motion to table. Is there a
Jason
second?
Crone, second.
And we have a second from Jason. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I feel badly for you that there's so much comes up at the last minute, but there was nothing that the county could do about that because we received the information so late.
I'm not blaming the county. I got a lot of money into this already just to get where I'm at, only to get this.
We don't have to wait till tomorrow to talk about options. So
Right. This is our last item. And is there any other discussion from board members of anything?
I move we adjourn.
All right. We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Dennis, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries. Our meeting is now adjourned.